which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, May 3rd, 2026 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Devil Wears Prada was a blockbuster. This time the stars are ready, by Milana Ryzik. Few movies can both generate a meme and put a color on the map. But The Devil Wears Prada managed it, and in the same scene. Cerulean knitwear was never the same. A blockbuster in 2006, the movie has grown only more beloved and more quotable since. 2 decades after Meryl Streep, as the unsparing fashion editor Miranda Priestly made a meal of the phrase, "That's all," comes the sequel, with the same director, David Frankel, and stars Anne Hathaway as Andy, the idealistic former assistant with serious journalism chops, who's back at Miranda's magazine runway. Emily Blunt as the barbed former underling Emily, now a design executive, and Stanley Tucci as Miranda's loyal right-hand man, Nigel. The characters endured, but they are all roiled by today's economics with tech overlords, corporate consolidations, and a crumbling media landscape. Hathaway said, "Things that used to feel so safe now feel so unstable, on screen and off." That was the heartstring that just kept coming up for me. For the cast, reuniting was a rare pleasure. Their whole professional lives blossomed in the interim. Streep said admiringly of Hathaway and Blunt, "And Stanley and I are close friends now. All that time, can't get rid of him. And Blunt and Tucci are family. In 2012, he married her older sister." Stuffed with cameos and comic scene stealers, The Devil Wears Prada 2, now in theaters, has been hotly anticipated. In a recent roundtable interview and separate conversations at the Four Seasons New York downtown, the director and cast reflected on filming 20 years apart, being ambitious, and whether Streep is mean in real life. There was a lot of laughter. These are edited excerpts from the conversations. "How do you think of the original movie now?" Meryl Streep: "Quaint. You know, it was made a year before the iPhone came out. It's another world entirely." Emily Blunt: "It's just been so moving that it had this meteoric life that none of us saw when we were making it. We thought we were hilarious, but we didn't think anyone else would." Stanley Tucci: "A lot of movies date pretty quickly. That movie works all the time. You have generations of people watching it." David Frankel: "Before the studio saw it, I called Meryl and said, 'Please come to the cutting room.' She was really my partner in making it. She hopped on the one train from Tribeca to Times Square and came in and said, 'It's great.' She knew right off the bat. That gave me so much confidence." Blunt: "This is the only film my children have liked that I've done. I've made children's movies for them, which they've seen once. My girls watched it again last night. They thought I was the meanest person on earth, and they see themselves in Annie. They're like, I'm her." But the new movie has a very different feeling than the original. Streep: "The first one was a Cinderella story, and this one is more like Pilgrim's Progress with better clothes. This young woman going through the stations of the cross, every crisis of conscience and betrayal." To Hathaway: "You have a lot of big decisions, so this is more complicated." Anne Hathaway: "Andy has a life that has given her a lot of satisfaction. She did what she wanted to do. She had a lot of adventures. The thing that she doesn't have, and she's having a hard time finding, is something that a lot of people in the world are having a difficult time finding, which is job security. And so the thing that kept coming up for me in this movie was how much she wanted a home. She does at least have better fashion sense. The clothes are even more central in a way." Tucci: "The fittings were as enjoyable as making the movie. It was such a collaborative effort with costume designer Molly Rogers." Streep: "Stanley's currently wearing a suit he designed." Tucci: "I love fashion." Hathaway. To be the costume designer of the Devil Wears Prada movie is a heroic act because it's not just one character arc, it's so many. Fashion is a language in the film. It's another character. It's like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. It's that important. Meryl, what did you like about Miranda Priestley originally? Streep. I liked the ability to... In drama school, they would say to us, do you know how to convey that you're the king or queen? And everybody would say, well, you project power, and it helps to have lifts in your shoes, things like that. And the teacher said, no, the way you convey power is how everyone else in the room behaves when you enter it. You just act naturally, but the molecules around you change. So that was the direction that everybody was afraid of me. I didn't have to raise my voice or do anything. Blunt. Your decision to play her that way was such an amazing way to go, to not come in swinging it around. I mean, your enormous penis. Laughter. Streep. Most of the bosses that I'd had in my life were men, so I copied them, the people that were good at leading in a strong way without making a big effort, seemingly. For a lot of you, the movie changed your life. Frankel. It was my first big studio movie, and my only wish was, please God, let me work again. Streep. I always feel that. Hathaway. Andy and I are the same age, and in the first film, we definitely shared a feeling of being in over our heads. This was, and I was to Streep, the biggest thing I'd ever been to part of. You heard me say this, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I was acting opposite. Streep, don't say it. Hathaway. Okay, I won't go there. I was acting opposite somebody from New Jersey, and I was really excited about it. Clasping hands with Streep. We're Jersey girls. Emily. It was your breakout role. Blunt. The character Emily is based on a few rather acerbic, anguished people that I know. She's a weird combination and then cartoonized of various British people. She's desperate and starving. But it's very fun to play someone who is perpetually outraged by everything. I felt like everyone went to read for that part. I was actually reading for a dragon movie that I deeply wanted. Thank God they said, hey, while you're here, we're making The Devil Wears Prada. Do you want to read for it? And I remember being very late for my flight, so I read it in a blind panic. Then David called me and said, can you come and do that again? But the studio wants to see you wearing something more stylish than the strange warrior queen costume I had to cobble on. Frankel. We had to pray that she didn't get the dragon movie. And on the day she didn't, I called her and her mother said, oh, she's gone down to the pub to drown her sorrows over not getting the dragon movie. I told her, you have the part, but she didn't believe me. Blunt, laughing. I was clearly drunk. How did it feel to step into the characters 2 decades later? Tucci. I was a bit nervous. I thought about, am I going to do this again? And then it just happened, Nigel's aged. Blunt. There's a little world weariness that's very touching about him. He doesn't sweat the small stuff. Tucci. He knows that the whole thing can only last for so long, but you only know that when you're my age. Streep. I was so nervous. I was not on any social media, so I didn't know that there was this appetite for the film. And when we got out in the street for filming, it was insane with fan attention. It threw me in the beginning. It really did screw me up. But then once we got nice and safe in the studio, I was fine. What lessons do these movies have about ambition? Hathaway. I don't know that the film says anything. It just shows. You're seeing ambitious women in action, and I like that. Blunt. Ambition has often been deemed a negative word for women. For men, it's seen as something to be celebrated. And I think ambition really only means dreams with great purpose. The first movie offered this very inspiring space for girls to look up to that, to want more for yourself. Streep. If Miranda Priestley were Michael Priestley, there would be no movie. The first movie. Everything she does is sort of slightly horrible, but would be kind of adorable if a man said, by all means, move at a glacial pace. You know how that thrills me. And everyone would go, oh, he's great, isn't he? But there's this special tinge of mercury around that kind of remark from a woman. Fake crying. It just hurts more. Watching these movies made me think of a great Tina Fey line, "Bitches get stuff done." Do you think that you can be a mean person and a good boss? Streep, I am a mean person. I don't have to think. Could I do that? Blunt, laughing. Do you mean in life or in the movie? Streep, in life. Blunt, mean as a snake. Tucci, she's not mean. Have you ever wanted to pull a Miranda in your real life? Hathaway, the way Miranda doesn't apologize and goes at the pace that she wants to, and it's for everyone else to keep up and anticipate what she's going to want next. Sometimes I would like to drop into that gear, but in real life, you kind of have to go with the pace of the group. Streep, I would like to lower my voice and have people pay attention, but it doesn't work. Blunt, it doesn't. There are very different stakes in making this movie. You have a legacy. You have a bigger budget. Frankel, the first movie was disastrous every day. I kept a journal, and on this movie, on day 4, I said, let me just see what day 4 was like 20 years ago. And it says, Thursday. It's hard to imagine a day could go worse than this. Hathaway, that wasn't the vibe on the set. Blunt, you did not break a sweat. My favorite is hearing David laugh behind the monitor. You're a very discreet laugher, but when you really guffaw, it's a dream. Frankel, the sequel's budget mostly went to them, the cast. So the making of the movie was kind of similar. We were always scrapping, and it was never enough. But that's normal, every movie. Streep, that's not true. The movies that are about women, there's a much bigger budget fight than there is for Chris Nolan or something. I love him, and I'd love to work with him, but... Frankel, Meryl's right. There's an expectation that movies about women have a limited box office, and so based on that, the studio says, okay, here's how much you get. And there are other movies where it's presumed unlimited box office, and so the budget is unlimited. And we did go through that again, even on the scale of this movie. We'll find out who was right. Meryl, you have a speech in the movie about the costs of career like Miranda's, but you also say emphatically how much you love working. In my screening, that line made people cry. Thanks for that. Streep, grabbing my face for emphasis and smiling. It must be said a little devilishly. That was an ad lib. You're welcome. Rediscovering the music of Norway's wild talent. A new generation of musicians is playing the compositions of Geir Tvedt by Karina de Fonseca Wollheim. On a summer night in 1970, high above a fjord in western Norway, the farmstead of the composer Geir Tvedt caught fire. As flames tore through the wooden buildings, family members rushed into a shed crammed with his unpublished scores. Using fruit crates, they hauled burning manuscripts into the open. By the time the fire was under control, roughly 80% of Tvedt's compositions had been destroyed. The loss hastened the eclipse of one of the most prominent and original voices in Norwegian music, St. Edvard Grieg. Now, a new album by the pianist Leif Ove Andeses is helping bring Tvedt, 1908 to 1981, to the attention of a wider international audience. He was sort of a wild talent, Anders says in an interview. His music sometimes has an erotic energy mixed with a very local feeling, and at the same time, enormous knowledge of what was going on internationally. It's a world unto itself. Born in Bergen and trained in Leipzig, Paris, and Vienna, Tvedt wrote prolifically across genres, including chamber works, popular songs, orchestrations of folk tunes, concertos, including for Norway's national folk instrument, the Hardanger fiddle, and a ballet on the subject from Norse mythology. For a time, Tvedt was a central figure in the country's musical life. He anchored a radio program and toured internationally as a pianist. But his final decades were spent largely isolated, his reputation tarnished by his nationalist beliefs and his wartime service in the puppet government of Nazi-occupied Norway. Even before the fire, his music was fading from view. The centerpiece of the new recording, Geir Tvedt, is the composer's only surviving piano sonata, number 29, entitled Etere, Italian for ethereal. Asnes performed it at Carnegie Hall last year. Its conception is boldly austere with just two themes elaborated over the course of three movements. The first skittish, roving theme evokes Nordic folk idioms. The second, questioning and mythical, seems to open onto a vast, frigid space. The third movement reworks the first theme as a brilliant and angular dance. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A transfixing moment occurs at the opening of the second, ethereal movement, when Tevet has the pianist silently depress a row of low keys with the left forearm while hammering out crisp notes above, so that the halo of overtones appears to rise from the released strings. Ansnes, who grew up in the same part of rural Norway where Tevet had his farm, said he recognized the acoustics of the landscape in that passage. Something in that music is connected to how things resonate there, Asnes said. The echoes, how things sound when you walk in nature, close to stone mountains. Just as striking as that echo is a marking that accompanies it in the score, during a held pause when only the fading resonance of the chord hangs in the air, Tevet asks for the sound to swell and taper as if trying to animate the aftersound itself. But a piano can't do that. Once the note is struck, it begins to decay. In a footnote, Tevet suggests that during radio performances, an engineer might raise and lower the volume manually during this movement. Asnes said that even in performance, without amplification, something of Tevet's intent comes through. Having the marking, Asnes says, draws attention to the resonance. It's very mysterious. Tevet's sound world was the product of a wide-ranging musical education. After attending conservatory in Leipzig, he took lessons in Paris with Arthur Honegger, Hila Villa-Lobos, and Nadia Bollinger, and in Vienna with Egon Willis, a former pupil of Arnold Schoenberg. The French influence often comes in his impressionistic-sounding palette. The Norwegian conductor, Tabita Berglund, described the sound like the most rural countryside in Norway meets the most elevated parts of Paris. At a recent concert with the NDR Elfa Philharmonic Orchestra in Hamburg, Berglund programmed the opening movement of the first suite of Tevet's 100 folk tunes from Hardanger, his most popular orchestral work, celebrating the nature and myths of southwestern Norway. Airy and tender, it unfurls a simple melody across different instruments. The use of color is extraordinary, Berglund said in an interview before the concert. It has this light in it. I can almost hear the waves on the Hardanger Fjord, near Tevet's farmstead. At one point in the piece, Tevet has an oboe and a piccolo trade undulating lines. The oscillating semitones create an effect of animated brightness. If any other composer had done that, it would have sounded like an alarm, Berglund said. But here, it just blends beautifully and creates this wavering, shimmering light. This naturalistic observation of landscape distinguishes Tevet from Grieg. Tevet's descriptions of landscape and atmospheric conditions feels more depersonalized and forensic than those of his romantic predecessor. How silently they row upon the glittering fjord, also from the 100 folk tunes, proceeds in a gleaming haze of flutes and string harmonics. Tonality is hinted at, unmoored, oblique. Elsewhere in the 100 folk tunes, Tevet applies his experimental zest to less pastoral subjects. In Fielsnack, Drunken Talk, he calls for a percussionist to smash glasses on stage. It's quite dangerous, said Berglund, who conducted a performance of that work with the Swedish Radio Orchestra. To guard against flying shards, they installed a tall bucket and equipped the percussionist with protective eyewear. Tevet didn't care about limitations, she said. He was sort of larger than life. But for Tevet, this engagement with Norwegian traditions was more than an aesthetic. It also went beyond music. He collected ancient weapons he found on his property, refusing to hand them over to a museum as required by law. His interest in Nordic folk music, with its modal melodies and archaic tunings, was part of a nationalistic outlook that aligned him with some of the most vociferously right-wing ideologies of the 1930s. His most overtly ideological composition is the ballet Balder's Dream, first staged in 1938, which is bathed in Norse pathos. Tvedt never joined the Norwegian pro-Nazi party and opposed the German occupation, but he did serve in the culture ministry of Vidkun Quisling's pro-Nazi government. Tvedt's political beliefs continue to be the subject of debate. Tvedt's theoretical writings made clear that for him, music was part of a wider push for reviving pre-Christian local traditions to shore up a racially defined Norse identity. In place of the major and minor scales that he had come to dominate Western music, he proposed 4 modes that he named Rir, Sum, Fum, and Tyr after Norse gods. In a 1938 article, he decried the hegemony of civilized music propagated by what he referred to as a thinly veiled way as the international parasite race, shadowy cosmopolitan forces that he felt destroyed more natural Norwegian forms of expression. In a review published in 1937, the Norwegian composer and music critic Pauline Hall dismissed Tvedt's scales as nothing more than the old church modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian, dressed up in Norse clothes, and decried the nationalist movement in Norwegian music as chauvinistic and reactionary. She mocked the new obsession with mythology as a crippling, all-purpose troll, just be yourself mentality. After the war, Tvedt was exonerated by the denazification authorities, but a whiff of racial chauvinism continued to cling to his music, and many performers steered clear of it. Since the 1990s, though, musicians and audiences have begun to embrace Tvedt as an essential musical voice. Scholars have reconstructed some of the lost works using recordings, orchestral parts scattered across archives, and the charred fragments from the house fire, some of which still held in the banana crates in which they were salvaged in 1970. They still smell. Kardivik Husby, a musicologist and librarian who painstakingly reconstructed several works, including scenes from Balder's Dream, a string symphony, a violin concerto, and piano concerto No. 3, Hommage La Brahms. Some of the sheets have just 3 or 4 legible bars in the middle of the page, he said. Others were remarkably intact. For the piano concerto, he worked mostly by ear using recordings of 2 different performances by Tvedt. The score is quite demanding. In both recordings, there are places where the orchestra is clearly not playing it correctly, he said. Obviously, I didn't write what they played. I wrote what they should have played. A growing number of recordings, mostly by Norwegian musicians, now attest to the rising popularity of Tvedt in his home country. On the album, Adnes is joined by his sister, the vocalist Slovene Adnes, and some popular songs Tvedt wrote for the radio. High and low didn't exist for him, Leif Ove Adnes said. He didn't really have a sense that these were different musical worlds that he moved in. There were people who felt strange about promoting him, Adnes added, recalling the reactions in Norway to his decision to program and record the music of Tvedt. There was a time in the 1930s when a lot of artists had some problematic views. I'm looking for the musical quality. We don't have to celebrate him as a person, Berglund said, but his music needs to be played. It's just fantastic, and it's unique. It could have been made nowhere else. Streaming. Battling Demons with Wit on Hulu by Jason Bailey. Every performance is a gem in the Oscar-winning Sentimental Value on Hulu. In the streamer's TV library, there are crime-fighting favorites, Moonlighting, an 80s screwball detective show with Bruce Willis, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Joss Whedon's supernatural series. Sentimental Value 2025. The winner of the year's Academy Award for Best International Film reunites the writer and director of The Worst Person in the World, Joachim Trier, with that picture's star, Renate Reinsve. She plays Nora, an actress whose success is somewhat eclipsed by that of her filmmaker father, Gustav, played by Stellan Skarsgård, which has put her further strain on their all but estranged relationship. When he writes her a lead in his new film, she flatly refuses to work with him, but her stubbornness is complicated when he casts a hot young American actress, Elle Fanning, in the role instead. All three actors were nominated for Oscars, along with Inga Ibsdottir Elias as Nora's perpetually peacemaking sister, and every performance is a gem, sympathetic, nuanced, prickly, and vulnerable in equal measure. My Cousin Vinny, 1992. Joe Pesci landed one of his first starring roles, and Marissa Tomei nabbed a surprise Oscar win in this fish-out-of-water comedy from the director Jonathan Lynn. The Times critic Vincent Canby called it inventive and enjoyable. Pesci is Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, a novice lawyer, he just passed the bar after 6 attempts, who roars into a rural Alabama town in his Cadillac convertible to defend his cousin, Ralph Macchio, and a friend wrongly accused of murder. Tomei is his gum-smacking girlfriend, Mona Lisa Vito, who alternates cynical commentary with delighted support, up to and including her film-stealing appearance on the witness stand. Dale Launer's smart screenplay resists the urge to play up Southern stereotypes or to leave Vinny and Mona Lisa as Brooklyn characters, instead finding honest laughs by both clashing these cultures and subverting expectations of them. For more comedy, stream The Death of Stalin and There's Something About Mary. It Was Just an Accident, 2025. The latest from writer-director Jafar Pahani, shot clandestinely in his home country Iran, where he has been frequently forbidden from making movies, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes for this staggeringly powerful story of the human price of political unrest. A comic howl in the dark in one of the year's essential movies, per our critic Manola Dargis. The film concerns Vahid Mombaseri, an auto mechanic who encounters a man he's certain is a brutal guard who tortured him years earlier. His attempt at revenge and the involvement of several other victims is complicated by the man's protestations of innocence. The longer the ordeal goes, the more questions Panani raises about guilt, innocence, and circumstance. Moonlighting, 1985 to 89. When this screwball detective show first aired, our critic John J. O'Connor wrote, "It could be the most significant television phenomena of 1985. That was not hyperbole. The show reignited the dormant career of the model-turned-actress Sybil Shepherd and introduced the world to a cocksure New Jersey wisecracker named Bruce Willis. The show's creator, Glenn Gordon Caron, envisioned it as a thin man for the 80s, full of overlapping, speedily delivered dialogue, quick wit, and sharp mysteries. But it started to fold into itself in the second season, with frequent fourth-wall-breaking references to the show, its stars, and later its protracted production. Moonlighting flamed out fairly quickly. A much ballyhooed roll in the hay between its protagonists became a cautionary tale for shows built on sexual tension, but it burned mighty bright while it lasted. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1997 to 2003. Few shows in television history sounded less promising than a series adaptation of an unloved, unsuccessful teen horror comedy debuting mid-season on a network no one had ever heard of. But from the ashes of the vastly compromised, it said, 1992 feature film came Joss Whedon's reimagined and recalibrated 7-season triumph, which slyly conflated the conventions of supernatural horror and high school life and asked which was truly the fiery hellscape. Though a little bumpy early on, it took some time for Whedon and company to find their tone and access to convincing special effects. Once Buffy finds its footing, it's unstoppable. In their Broadway debuts, a tight bond. Don Cheadle and Ayo Edebiri play a father and daughter in the new revival of Proof by Salamisha Tillet. Don Cheadle was not itching to return to the theater, where he last appeared 25 years ago in the off-Broadway premiere of Suzanne Laurie Parks' Top Dog Underdog, with numerous TV and film commitments, including several turns as a Marvel superhero. The theater, he said, was just not on my radar. Another sticking point, the time commitment. I was kind of not thinking about being there in New York for 4 months or 5 months, said Cheadle, who lives in Santa Monica, California. I couldn't get my head around it. But sometimes it's only that the right factors have yet to align, such as when the award-winning director of Hamilton, Thomas Kail, comes calling, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of Proof, David Auburn, wants you for a revival of his canonical work, and you are told you'll be performing opposite Ayo Edebiri, an Emmy-winning star of The Bear. I'm just a fan of her talent, Cheadle, 61, said of Edebiri, 30. She's very funny and dramatic, has a lot of range, and has a dark and wry sense of humor. And I just thought, this play is traditionally not a black family, and thinking about playing her father and what that dynamic would be like, it just made sense. And so Cheadle is making his Broadway debut alongside Edebiri, who's also making hers in Kail's revival of Proof at the Booth Theater. She's Catherine, a 25-year-old in Chicago, grieving the death of her father, Cheadle's Robert, a brilliant mathematics professor who struggled with madness. Catherine also seems to be showing signs of the same debilitating mental illness that afflicted her father. Or is she? That is one of the questions raised in the story that, with an African-American family now at its center, is playing a little differently 25 years after it won the Tony Award for Best Play. Working together has been even cooler than we imagined, Edebiri told me when I interviewed the two co-stars at the theater in April. Even in that first reading, I was like, oh, why do I feel like we know each other or something? The play's weighty themes include mental health, intergenerational wealth, and academic outsiderness, which culminate in a central conflict. When one of Robert's former graduate students, Hal, discovers a mind-blowing proof in a notebook in his desk, Catherine claims authorship. Neither Hal nor Catherine's older sister, Claire, who has traveled from New York for the funeral, thinks she is capable of writing something mathematicians have been trying to demonstrate since they've been mathematicians. Their skepticism drives the rest of the story, subtly exposing their biases and the audiences about gender, genius, and in this version, race. That complexity was apparent to Edebiri about a decade ago when she first read the script as an undergraduate studying playwriting and TV writing at New York University. I just remember being like, that's a perfect play, she said. And you go through it and talk about stricture, language, and the full dramatic setup. But she never seen a full stage production. Just different girls do scenes from it for the showcase or something else at the end of the semester. Then there were all the great girls, as she put it, describing the celebrated actresses, all of them white, who had preceded her in the role. Mary Louise Parker, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Gwyneth Paltrow in the 2005 movie. I had a certain preconception in my mind of what it was, Edebiri said. Reading the play again as she considered taking the role, she was surprised, she said, by how much resonated in the ways that it did. I don't really cry much in my life, she said, and I was crying reading this, and I was very surprised by that. And then I called Tommy back, and I was like, okay, I guess we have to do this, right? She also spoke to Parker, who won a Tony for her portrayal of Catherine. It's good because it's good for the weirdos, she recalls Parker saying approvingly. It's good for the girls like us. For Cheadle, the movie's themes of isolation and illness also hit home. He and his siblings grew up as academic brats, moving around with their parents as they pursued advanced degrees. His mother, Betty Cheadle, became a teacher. His father, Donald Cheadle Sr., was a clinical psychologist. My dad ended up being at those universities where he was probably one of the only black people there at the time, he said of his father, who died in 2020. His mother died in 2016 after living with Alzheimer's. Also, what our parents went through with mental health issues and how we dealt with the caretaking, he added. There was just a lot of things reverberating every night for me. In one scene that is at once captivating and heartbreaking, Catherine realizes that Robert is in a state of permanent delusion. He's on a high, convinced he has had a breakthrough, but as Catherine opens the notebook, she sees that all he has written is gibberish. Her reaction goes from disappointment to tender and protective. In her review, the New York Times chief theater critic Helen Shaw noted that the actors performed charmingly together. They are both down to earth and unshowy in their clear affection for each other, and they're warmly believable as child and parent. Their connection extends beyond the stage. After rehearsals, they often saw plays together and still grab meals with their castmates, Carrie Young and Jin Ha, whenever they can. I have kids that are both very close to Ayo's age, and they're both Libra. She's a Libra. That's just all this stuff that we felt was very easy, Cheadle said. We work in a similar way and have the same sort of ethos about what we're trying to accomplish. Family is how Cale thinks of the play, which he saw on Broadway with his parents when he was 25. During our video interview, he recalled thinking, "This isn't really about math." He had considered reviving it off Broadway in 2019 and reached out to Auburn. I'm almost always impacted by revivals that allow the play to be a prism in which you can shine a light through that's different than the original source, Cale said. For this production, Cale felt that having actors of color would change the stakes. He cited, for example, Claire's plan to give up the family home after Robert dies and take Catherine back to New York City for her younger sister's well-being. What it means for this family, this black family in the world of academia, to sell the house to the university is a completely different conversation. Cale noted that Auburn was open to revisiting his story, but only when the right ensemble came together. We all said Ayo's name very quickly, Cale said. I first saw her in The Bear, and I thought her mind was so active, and it feels like there are 10 things she's thinking and one she's saying. There's something about that I just felt like it rhymed with Catherine, someone who had more here than could be expressed and was trying to find a way to express that. Auburn eventually made minor updates to his script, reflecting the casting. In one scene, for example, Claire confronts Catherine about calling the police on Hal, whom Catherine catches trying to take one of her father's notebooks. In the original text, after Claire relays the officer's suspicion that Catherine might have made up the incident, Hal left before they arrived, she tells her sister, "The police said you were abusive." But after discussions during rehearsals, Auburn reworked the language in its implied physical altercation, while also keeping the racial stereotype that often applied to African Americans. The police said you were aggressive. It didn't seem like in 2026, with a black family, this little visit that's described from the police just lands differently than it did in 2000 with a white family, Auburn said. Auburn does not believe that all plays need to speak to the current moment. I don't think art necessarily has to do that, he said. I think transporting us to a different set of concerns and grounding us in that and doing what's in that community is also really valuable. But Edebiri appreciates the updates and contemporary nods. So many people are coming, and they're young people who are experiencing things for the first time, she said, a bit teary-eyed as she reflected on the play and the politics of today. And that just gives me some sort of hope that we can all just keep trying to find each other and connect with each other and remember each other in our humanity. Headliner, My 10. Jet Li won't keep you standing around. In his memoir, Beyond Life and Death, Jet Li describes being sent to the Beijing Sports and Exercise School at 8. He ended up in martial arts and film history changed. After years of competition, Li put his training to use in 1982 in Shaolin Temple and became an action star with Once Upon a Time in China franchise, Hero, Fearless, and The Expendables. In the book, Li dives into his practice of Tibetan Buddhism. I learned martial arts and I made movies, but I couldn't find the meaning of life, he said. In a video interview from his home in Singapore, Li, 62, discussed what it means a lot to him. His daughter Jada, with whom he hosts the YouTube series So Be It, helped with the translation. These are edited excerpts by Elizabeth Vincentelli. 1. Mala beads. I will ask each of my teachers for one prayer bead, which are strung on a string to form a necklace or garland. They remind me of them and their teachings. That's become a habit. They teach me the most important thing is compassion and wisdom. I love beads. I collect a lot of them. Number 2, stir-fried shredded potatoes. When I grew up, my family was very poor, and my mom always cooked potatoes. Since then, wherever I go, I just ask, "Do you have a fresh potato?" I love the taste, and it reminds me of my mom. Number 3, massages. I was 8 and learning martial arts, and I would get injuries. Then I had more when making movies. I would always get injured. You try to fix it, but you never get 100% fix it. So I get sports massages wherever I go in the style of my country. Number 4, instant coffee. I was 11 for the first time I went to America, and that was the first time I drank coffee. It was like Chinese traditional medicine, bitter. So I put more sugar, he laughs. It was strange but good. I went back to China, but we didn't have coffee in the 1970s. When I made my first movie, the whole crew in Hong Kong would bring in instant coffee. If I did well, they would give me one, he laughs. Now you can have a very special coffee machine, but my memories still go back to that coffee. If I travel, I will buy instant coffee just for the memory. Number 5, punctuality. When we were late for training as kids, the coach would punish us, make us run 400 meters in a circle around 20 times. Every time you were late, you ran. So that became stuck in my head when I was a little boy. You cannot be late. Show your pride and respect people. If you tell me 8 o'clock, I will be there 10 or 15 minutes before and wait. Number 6, Li Shizhen. He was an herbalist and physician in the Ming Dynasty. He passed away hundreds of years ago, but his book, Compendium of Materia Medica, is still helping people. When you become a little famous, people will ask, "Who's your idol?" I say, I don't have an idol, but I like Li Shizhen because he's not beating somebody up, he laughs. I fight people in movies, and some think it's cool, but deep inside, I want to help people. Number 7, George Lamb's A Man Should Strengthen Himself. This is from Once Upon a Time in China. It's about the need to be strong, and it's very emotional. Whether I'm learning about myself or making a movie, I hear the song and I think, wow, I need to do it again. Try again. Number 8, sunglasses. I became famous when I was young, and everybody knew me. Everybody tried to take pictures. I was not very comfortable, so I wore a cap. It was also bald for a lot of roles, so it kept me warm. Then I got sunglasses. I have a lot of them. People know I like them and give them to me for my birthday. Number 9, awareness. A lot of people realize they need to meditate. They need to concentrate, and meditation has become popular. But the goal of meditation is awareness, knowing without judgment. I do an hour daily and try to maintain awareness the rest of the day. Number 10, appreciation. People know how to train their body, be healthy, exercise, but not so many understand how to train their mind. For the past 30 years, I've been training my mind to figure out the meaning of life and be happier. I say, relax, appreciate life, appreciate your teacher, parents, partner, whatever you need to appreciate. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Art and Leisure section on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Adapting a beloved book while preserving its power. Alfonso Herrera stars in the first Spanish-language screen version of The House of Spirits on Amazon by Carlos Aguilar. Like many people, the Mexican actor Alfonso Herrera suffered mentally and emotionally during the COVID-19 pandemic. He began therapy while shooting the Netflix series Ozark in Atlanta, and during one session, the therapist asked him to restate in Spanish something he had just said in English, even though she didn't speak Spanish herself. I asked her, "Why do you want me to say it in Spanish?" Herrera recalled recently. She replied, "Because what you just expressed is something deeply important to you, and speaking it aloud in your mother tongue will resonate with a much stronger echo within both your conscious and your unconscious mind." Herrera, 42, believes that link between language and identity will infuse The House of the Spirits, a new series adaptation of the seminal Isabel Allende novel with powerful feeling of cultural and emotional connection. That connection stands to be more powerful, certainly, than that of the widely panned English version film from 1993, in which Jeremy Irons and Meryl Streep led a mostly white cast in portraying a Chilean family. The show on Amazon Prime Video will be the first Spanish-language screen adaptation of the novel, which was first published in 1982. Allende is an executive producer with Eva Longoria, Courtney Saladino, and others, and the series also stars Nicole Wallace and Dolores Fonzi. It was shot entirely in Chile. The fact that this version was filmed in Chile in Spanish with Ibero-American talent generates a very distinct DNA, Herrera says. American viewers might know Herrera, who lives in Mexico City, from Ozark. He played the ruthless drug lord Javi in season 4. He was also in the sci-fi series Sense8 by Lana and Lily Wachowski and the TV version of The Exorcist. But he has been a star in Latin America for decades, having broken out in the early 2000s as part of the pop group RBD. Mexican films like the queer period drama Dance of the 41 and the acid political satire Que Viva Mexico expanded his dramatic resume. The House of Spirits is a multi-generational tale steeped in a magical realism that chronicles life in an unspecified Latin American country that resembles Chile across most of the 20th century. Herrera plays Esteban, a determined landowner who embodies outdated patriarchal and conservative ideals with ferocious personality. The decade-spanning story depicts political violence that mirrors the 1973 coup d'etat in Chile that overthrew the government of Salvador Allende, a cousin to the author's father, and installed Augusto Pinochet in power. Herrera first read the novel as an assignment when he was in high school. In a video interview, Herrera discussed the series and his career on both sides of the border. These are edited excerpts from the conversation. Esteban is simmering in grief and fills the void with material success. He is an authoritarian who is willing to use violence to maintain power, not unlike figures in our current political reality. What does the character mean to you? Esteban symbolizes the Latin American political system, which is rife with injustice, completely unbalanced, and devoid of emotional conscience. This story is tremendously relevant because it depicts social polarization like what we are experiencing today in many countries, including the United States. To speak of the House of Spirits is to speak of what happened in the region that stretches from the Rio Grande to Patagonia. There are many sorrows, many wounds, and many scars that we all share throughout Latin America. Take, for instance, the dictatorships in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. And as the writer Mario Vargas Llosa put it, Mexico, too, was a perfect dictatorship, having been ruled by the same political party for 70 years. The story is a mural of who we are as Latin Americans, but we also share the legacy of colonialism, which cemented the ways in which we communicate, how we coexist, and our social structures. Was the role physically demanding? You had to speak with a Chilean accent and undergo a physical transformation as the character ages. I had to juggle several things at once. The Chilean accent differs enormously from the Mexican accent. At the same time, I portrayed Esteban from the time he was 30 right up to his death, which meant there was extensive use of prosthetics. While we were filming, Pepe Mora and Jordi Moreira, the makeup artists who created all the prosthetics, and I were watching The Penguin. I recall Colin Farrell saying in interviews, "We spent 3.5 hours in the makeup chair." I remember us hearing that and thinking, hold my beer. We were clocking in at 6.5 hours just for application process. Obviously, I say this in a playful manner, but if you do the math, I actually spent over 240 hours sitting in that chair. I would place a photo of my children on the mirror and tell myself, we're going to get through this. Then I would look at the meticulous work Pepe and Jordi were doing and think, wow, this is worth being patient for. And it paid off. You've been working Hollywood productions for only the past decade or so. How did that begin? I received a casting call for Sense8, and I landed the role, and after that I returned to Mexico and continued working there. Then more opportunities to audition started coming in from the United States, and I landed some of those as well. At a certain point, it wasn't just invitations to audition anymore, but rather direct job offers, which fortunately were for interesting projects such as Ozark or Queen of the South. You are always appreciative when you get invited to join a project. Considering you've had multiple films in Mexico in the past few years, you don't seem to be actively chasing Hollywood stardom. Working here in El Norte is not something I lose sleep over. I've had the opportunity to work in the United States, and I've met fantastic people, but what matters to me is simply to keep working, and that means working in my country and throughout Latin America. But when they invite me to work in the United States, I'd be delighted to do it again. For many Latin American actors, working in Hollywood represents a pinnacle of success. With streaming, a click is worth the same whether it comes from the United States or France or Mexico. The Spanish series Money Heist had a significant global impact, and there have been other shows from Latin America with global reach. I find it fascinating to think that a click holds the same value now no matter where in the world you happen to be. Streaming's global subscription model also makes it possible for books like The House of Spirits to be adapted with lavish production values, but still in their original language. That also has to do with the importance and the sheer power of the novel. I was in Switzerland to watch the Women's Euro tournament, and I popped into some bookstores. Elizabeth Allende's books were consistently on the store's best-selling lists. The House of the Spirits, arguably her most significant work, has been a bestseller in Japan, France, and Germany alike. Regardless of the fact that the series is in Spanish, I believe it will successfully cross over into other markets, in great part because the novel remains as relevant as ever. Fresh chapter with a familiar beat. Rush prepares to tour again with a new drummer years after losing a beloved member, by Hani Shmir. In late March, tucked into a small studio on a quiet Toronto side street, Rush was doing something the storied prog rock outfit hasn't done in more than a decade: rehearsing for a tour. After losing their drummer, Neil Peart, to brain cancer 2020, the Canadian trio had gone silent. But on this rainy Sunday, the group, with new touring member Annika Niles behind the kit, was running through an epic early 80s deep cut, preparing for its 50-something tour, a worldwide trek that includes nearly 90 dates and kicks off June 7th in Inglewood, California. After they wrapped up, the vocalist and bassist, Geddy Lee, huddled into the control room with another new touring recruit, the keyboardist Lauren Gold, to iron out a sticky transition. In tinted glasses, his brown hair hanging shoulder length, his signature soul patch now fully gray, Lee soon emerged upbeat. He then corralled band members, crew members, and several visitors to screen an iPhone video shot by his wife that showed him holding Dottie Wasserman, his beloved Norwich Terrier, as she howled along to his vocal warm-up routine. "She's never done this before," Lee, 72, said, beaming at the interspecies duet. Throughout the afternoon, Rush tore throughout 11 of the 38 songs the band is relearning, the titles all a closely guarded secret. Between takes, the musicians prioritized rapid-fire comic banter. "That song has so many words," Lee mock-groaned after one rendition. "The guitar has so many strings," Alex Lifeson, also 72, and Lee's best friend and bandmate from around 60 years, deadpanned back. The next day, during an extended sit-down along with Lifeson at Barbarians, a historic steakhouse in the band's Toronto hometown, where Lee's favorite booth features a small gold badge wearing his birth name, Gershon Weintraub, Lee summed up Rush's MO. "The way we work best is to be intense and pay attention to details," he said, "and then the minute the song is over, get as ridiculous as you can be." The levity in the Rush camp was noteworthy given the formidable task at hand. The upcoming shows will be the group's first in 11 years, and they will be the first in 5 decades without Peart, whose hyper-meticulous playing style and probing philosophical lyrics made him an icon to a generation of brainy rock introverts. The tour will explicitly honor him during its evening-length 2-set shows. In the back of my mind and in the back of my heart It's felt like unfinished business, like we owe him a proper thank you and a celebration, Lee said. Not a morbid, funereal type of thing. We want to celebrate the wonderful music the three of us spent almost 50 years writing together. In 2022, Lee and Lifeson reunited with guest drummers, including Dave Grohl and Tool's Danny Carey, for mini-sets at two all-star tributes to the Foo Fighter drummer Taylor Hawkins, held at London's Wembley Stadium and the Forum in Inglewood. The events energized them, especially after another guest star, Paul McCartney, urged them to get back out on the road. Never argue with a Beatle, Lifeson joked. In a video interview, Stuart Copeland, the Police drummer and a friend of Peart's, also appeared at the Hawkins tributes, recalled the goodwill that surrounded Lee and Lifeson there. I think it reminded them of what they were missing, just to be playing in front of a big crowd, because they were extremely warmly received and embraced, he said. Backstage, all of the musicians were just full of warm fuzzies for Alex and Geddy. Casual jams in Lee's basement ensued, and talk of the reunion grew more serious. Lifeson, managing digestive issues and persistent arthritis, hesitated but eventually signed on. Around this time, Lee pulled up videos of Niles, a German drummer 30 years his junior, whom his longtime bass tech, John McIntosh, known as Scully, had gotten to know on a Jeff Beck tour and enthusiastically recommended. This is a deep talent, Lee recalled, thinking, can she play Rush? We had no idea. Niles, who found online fame in the early 2010s with tasteful playthroughs of her own jazz and fusion originals, had barely heard of Rush before Scully tipped her off that Lee and Lifeson wanted to chat. Growing up, her drumming hero was Jeff Porcaro, the Toto member and studio legend known for his sleek, hard-grooving style. She crash-coursed on their music, then jumped on Zoom while on tour in Germany, staying in a subpar hotel. I'm having a call with the two most iconic guys in a really trash room, she recalled with a mortified laugh during a separate interview at Barbarians. They invited her to Toronto in the spring of 2025 to play a handful of Rush songs across 5 days. After the fourth day, Lee said, there was a sliver of doubt, not about her overall abilities, but about her grasp of the tiny nuances of Peart's style, as Lifeson put it, the stuff in between all those big roles. But Lifeson added, something clicked with her that we just were rehearsing on the 5th day. She just nailed it. The official invite came at the end of the trip, but Niles, 42, said she only realized the magnitude of what she was stepping into on the flight home. I had a sip of wine on the airplane, she said. I flew over Toronto and saw the skyline, and everything was like crazy. At the rehearsal in March, Lee played and sang from inside an isolation booth, but he had Niles on his sightline, and the two shared a palpable camaraderie, exchanging animated looks as they navigated the song's daredevil twists. Occasionally they derailed, but the overall mood was one of exhilaration, not stress. I can't keep up with you, Lee told Niles warmly at the conclusion of one of Rush's naughtiest showpieces. On their way to the control room for a break, the two high-fived. I'm going to be a bit sad when we hit the stage and I'm facing the audience and not facing her because I'm having so much fun playing along with her. I think for a while we put Rush in a box and put that box in our closet, and it's almost like it felt weird to open the closet and open the box, Lee said. But playing at the Hawkins tribute, he continued, taught us something really important about music. A band can end, but the music lives on. And I think we were kind of afraid to take ownership of songs that we wrote with him together, songs that we did together. The performance, the first one especially in Wembley, felt so good and right. It's like we had taken the box out of the cupboard and we had opened it, and you know what? It was okay. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, May 3rd, 2026 issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. We read from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section every Sunday at 3. Your reader has been Jean. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the re-airing of this morning's Buffalo News. Following that at 6 p.m. is the Buffalo News Viewpoints. Stay tuned for this reading and more throughout the day. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability